You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My two guests today are Peter Kaas and Niels-Peter Kjølbye. Hello and welcome to The Only Constant, Peter and Niels-Peter. So today I have two guests in the studio, which doesn't happen that often, but these two are both brilliant experts in the legal field and they have been working with privacy and AI for many years, and that's why we're going to discuss that today. So Peter Kaas, welcome, and Niels-Peter Kjølbye from Basico, welcome both of you.
Thank you.
So what are some of the clear-cut opportunities for AI in a legal space, Peter?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities for lawyers to embrace this technology. It is largely based on, well, especially generative AI. I think maybe that's also let's narrow the field and go from there and say generative AI, large language models. Lawyers, we work with language, and a large language model is in many ways quite a perfect fit for us. It's something we can use for writing, for drafting documents, for reviewing large amounts of text. That's pretty much what a lawyer does, and I think Niels-Peter can agree with me. I mean, we spend a lot of our time reading stuff and writing stuff, and synthesizing information, taking information and rearranging it and organizing it and presenting it in a different way, in a sense. And that's where these language models come into play. And I think also we can see that the ease of adoption, it's pretty easy to get started with this technology. I think legal tech has been around for a while, for many years. And I think it's safe to say a lot of organizations that have adopted legal tech has not really had the benefits that they hoped. They couldn't automate to the degree they were hoping for or expecting. But with Gen AI, I mean, you can get a very long way with very little effort and very little cost associated with it. So it's easy to get started. I think that's one of the opportunities. And then when you look at how the technology works, it's also very compatible to working with junior lawyers. Those of us who are a little more senior in our career, we also spend time instructing junior lawyers and working with them. And in a sense, that's also the way you can engage with a generative AI model. You feed it information, you ask it questions, or enter into dialogue with information you've uploaded, you prompt it. Then you may get something back that's not entirely what you wanted, but that's also what you can get from a junior lawyer. I can also remember my time when I came out of law school. I didn't really know how to be a lawyer. I may have the sort of the legal theory down, but I couldn't really apply it in practice. And that's the same thing. There's a lot of theory embedded in the models. They've been trained on information, legal information, and that's that sense. It's a technology that's very adaptable and easy to adopt in a sense.
So is this but you know, you also learned things by going meticulously over all these boring things that you had to do initially when you were a junior lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Are junior lawyers going to do that today, and will they become senior lawyers, or will they become senior lawyers that are different from the way you are a senior lawyer today?
I think that you touch on two things, or several things actually. I think that there's an issue here we may face as a legal profession. It could also be the same for other professions. That this sort of training and learning by doing, working on instruction from a more senior colleague, helping you develop, is that something we will just completely leapfrog out of, and you would go straight to becoming a senior lawyer, as you put it, Lasse, with the experience? But how do you get that experience if you have it already in a machine? I think that's a fundamental question that the legal profession will need to start tackling, and we need to start tackling it now because the technology is there. It is a discussion going on. How do we train the lawyers in law school? Because if they have access to a GPT that can write their written assignments for them, help them write their master thesis or other big projects, how do they learn? And then same problem in the workspace.
Yeah, do you see the same problems or same possibilities as well, Niels-Peter, and some of the same issues?
Absolutely, I very much agree with Peter. And one of the things there's a lot of opportunities. Obviously, we can go back to that. But just to comment on one of the obstacles here is when you're training younger law professionals with AI technology, how do we ensure that they know what good looks like? So it's like a food recipe. If I order lasagna, I have an expectation how it will taste with different variations. But the lack of experience will actually make you more challenged in the kitchen, so to speak. And that is something that's very important to understand. So when I use it, I'm very happy about the technology as it is right now, and I know it will be a lot better. But I'm very happy because I know what I'm looking for, and then I can use it to get there. But younger people, we may tell them what they look for, but they are not sure how it will actually look in the end. So that's part of like a two-faced issue or
yeah, that's an issue. There's also the whole issue about that we think when we write as well, right? And what if you start having someone always writing your legal comments or your paragraphs or something like that in your contracts? Are you even really? Because I remember when I work with senior lawyers like you guys, it's always like you just write this language, but it's like super concise. It's like high energy language. There's just so much to unfold in each word, and that's a training thing. That's the core training thing for a lawyer, isn't it? And if you have a GPT helping you write that all the time, doesn't the opportunity then become the challenge as well to some extent, sort of attacking the center of being a lawyer, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think in a way it does. And as I said before, I think we need to embrace that fact and find a way to work with it. We need to start looking at it in law school. It could be as simple as saying, well, some assignments, some casework, or some of the work you learn, you rely specifically on the generative AI technology, and for certain parts of your law school training, you need to do without. So that could be, but just as an example, we grade in Copenhagen Law School when you write something on the quality of your language. And a law professor recently said, well, you would be an idiot if you don't use some sort of generative AI technology to help you write better. So a lot of people can write better, and you write this sort of, I like the term high energy language. I haven't heard that about what we do as lawyers. I need to take that back home with me and say we write in high energy language.
No, but also, I just had a conversation with Carl Friston that's coming out this week, and the reason is because you have high energy messages, and then you have the entropy on your side, and sort of unfolding it. Yeah. Or you can have something that's already in multiple directions that come in that you have to sort of structure, right? Yeah. But this is something that unfolds inside of you because it's so high energy.
It's much of the legal language is built on definitions.
Definitions and conventions and ways of writing, right? And there's this sort of, all these memes and jokes around how lawyers write different. Remember, I think you've probably all seen the Christmas card from your lawyer meme, right? Where Merry Christmas becomes a very complicated message because you're not allowed to say Merry Christmas depending on religious denomination, and you don't necessarily wish people a Merry Christmas because that might be a promise or a warranty, things like that, right? So we have all the jokes, but you're right. I think we need to, coming back to the point, we need to find a way, and I don't think we've solved that issue now because, again, AI has been around for a long time, but generative AI and the ease of access to it is what, 2 years old now, right? It's something where it just all of a sudden hit us and hit hard.
And you touched upon something just a moment ago, right? You said that now we have something that can actually do things for us. For a long time we've been working with different legal technology that didn't really do anything for us. We're overpromised and very much under-delivered, right? And one of my questions was, I wrote it down when you said it, is that is that the raw language model that you find is an opportunity to work with or better, because it's still not the suite products where you build it into some kind of process, right? That's still underwhelming, isn't it?
It is, but I think you can get a long way with the raw models. Of course, there's all sorts of considerations with at least the open available models, confidentiality issues, things like that. I think we can get back to that. But on the essence, you can start working with it out of the box. You don't need to sign. You just sign up with, let's say, ChatGPT, and then you could start working with it as a lawyer and engaging with it. You could upload
the flexibility to work with how you're
Exactly.
working, right? But that also leaves the second point for me from saying that is that, okay, so we're talking about all the challenges, but the challenges now are like more generational, or it's more indirect challenges. Before, the challenge was just to get something productive. But do you agree with this, Niels-Peter? Now it is productive, and now we just need to figure out how we sort of stay alive, or what is that? Or stay lawyers, or is...
Yeah, I do. I mean, every change in the field of law will need someone with a certain age to accept it, and because it's a very traditional system, it's very conventional. It's conservative in a lot of senses, which is good because it's supposed to protect your law and order. So it shouldn't be easy to disrupt it.
No.
But that's one of the things. I remember when I did law cases, court cases. We couldn't email the High Court of Denmark. We had to print everything, every exhibit, every appendix. Everything should be in original form, signed in 3 copies, and we had to go by bike to deliver that to the High Court. Whereas the city court, we could just email, which made a huge difference on the stress level in the law office. But that was because they were used to just accept in the High Court that we need it in paper. Then we can say it's actually been submitted by you and received by us. And eventually they changed the system so we could email the High Court, and everyone was like, "Of course we can. What's the difference here? We all work in emails." But it took a while. And that's a good example of how slowly the legal system will adapt to new technology. And I think
so.
we
Email
will see
was
the same.
okay. Yeah, okay. So email was also a legal tech that worked. Very change resistant profession, right?
We just had to be sure it worked before we could actually implement it.
But what Peter is
into the
saying
court
right now is
system.
that this works, right? The large language models actually work, right?
Yeah, I agree. I love it. It's easy to use. It consumes a lot of words and documents and analysis. It can produce very fast stuff. So,
but how are your legal peers then, approaching, embracing, or maybe resisting this technology? Because everyone is. I can count the times I've seen developers saying that the lawyer is up, you're next, they just want to kill you off. I don't know why they hate you so much, but there's
I think it's because
the prime culprit, right? For some reason.
Yeah, I think in a corporate setting, but also as an external advisor, I think, Niels-Peter, you can probably recognize that we always tend to come in, and that could also be the way that collaboration exists, but we always are the ones who sort of poop on people's parade, right? And then come in and say, well, you can't do this because X, Y, and Z. Have you considered this and that? That's partly what we're there for. We are sort of I like to view it as a conscience of a corporation or organization, Jiminy Cricket, saying, well, you need to do things right because otherwise you'll get in trouble. But that can be perceived as us disrupt or destroying good business ideas or good ideas. And we are also trained in law school to spot issues. There's a sort of a research being done on how lawyers are weird compared to the rest of the population. We are very skeptical in the way we perceive things. We are trained to, as I said, spot issues, and that's probably something we are born with, and then that's why we gravitate towards law school, and then those traits are amplified by going through 5 or 6 years of law school, as it is here in Denmark. It's a little bit different in other jurisdictions, but basically we focus on that. That might be why people want to kill us off or replace us with robots in a sense.
Also goes the other way, right? Sometimes you have a lawyer that goes on the other route, not being critical, but seeing all the possibilities for circumventing.
Exactly, and that's where you get into other kinds of problems, right? But in a sense, and you probably want, when things go wrong, usually you are pretty happy that at least someone either told you in advance so you were conscious of the risk or tried to mitigate the risk. But coming back to the point whether or not we'll be replaced by this technology, I don't think so. Yeah, I think a lot of professions will be affected by this technology. and lawyers may be one of the first ones to feel it. I think the interesting thing about this type of technology is that we've had jobs being replaced throughout history by technology, but not typically the white collar jobs like lawyers. Those has been sort of reserved and sort of kept out of technology, technical advancements. But now we see this technology coming in and being able to do some of the work that we do. Writing the high energy language, the complicated language, and reviewing complicated information. That's something we can see now. We can at least partially have a machine do for us. But I think all the positive sides where we talked about, and Niels-Peter and I saying, well, it works, but then in a sense it doesn't. I think you had a really good point by saying, how do we train ourselves to review when the output is wrong or faulty, or the hallucinations coming from the chat system?
That is what usually a lawyer is doing for everyone, right? That was what your point was, Niels-Peter, right?
Yeah, it's well, we do that already in different manners. We are also very bound to jurisdiction in many senses, which is there's a lot of jurisdictions, obviously, even though we have European law gathering some of the stuff. So we are used to spot the issues, as you say, Peter. We are used to get an output, see if it's correct, but we still need to adapt to how the system works. So I think one of the major obstacles right now with legal persons and AI is we need to get comfortable using it. So I think it's very basic that one of the major obstacles is that the resistance to use it is actually the first thing we have to overcome.
Yeah. But this also it actually brings me to something I wanted to speak with you on later on, maybe. But I think it's interesting to pick up right now is that if we say all of society and all of enterprise functions will be affected by some kind of generative AI in the future, and which is the assumption, right? Then we will need even more people with a critical sense than before, and not less. So is it a good idea? Maybe we should just keep it away from lawyers and put them in some kind of tower somewhere.
Yeah, well,
you get my point, right?
Yeah. I think sitting in a tower. I think that's appealing in a sense, right? Where then you can descend and give people your tablets of wisdom or whatever you want to call it. No, I think that's that wouldn't work, because we would. I mean, one of the ways we can actually engage from a critical sense with this technology is by using it. That's also something I've come to realize. I mean, the more we work with it, the more we can understand the possibilities, but also the risks associated with AI. So we need to engage with the technology. And I think there we see. I'm not sure actually we see a split in clear cut sort of. You could say so. Traditionally would be that the most senior lawyers, or the old lawyers, are resistant to adopting this, and the brand new lawyers recently out of university or in university might be faster adopters of the technology. I'm not sure that's necessarily how we see the split, because we can definitely see, at least also in my sort of, when I look at the younger lawyers, they don't necessarily have adopted this fully yet, and we realize the potential, whereas some senior lawyers are actually adopting it. And then coming back to my point about how it's similar to training and engaging with younger colleagues, that's where you see it. But you also see a lot of the elder generation saying, well, then they type in an answer, question, and then they don't really get the answer they want, then they abandon it and saying this doesn't work, and back to the good old-fashioned way of working. So I think it's largely a question of how much do you engage with the technology, how curious are you in exploring, and that might be a little bit also on what type of person are you, not necessarily what type of lawyer are you. Are you someone who's willing to at least give it one more shot? And I think once you start embracing that mentality, saying it may not be perfect the first time. I mean, it's not perfect now. I mean, still we need to work with the output. We can't rely on it fully. But conscious of that fact that it will save you some of the more tedious work. And I think that's where we see that it's that sort of idiom saying, well, AI won't replace you, but someone with AI will replace you. Sort of a tried and a little bit tedious way of saying it, but there is a truth to it, saying, well, you can take some of the work that is not really that interesting, doesn't bring you a lot of value to yourself, or sort of from a person that doesn't bring value a lot to the organizations you serve, and you can automate that in a sense with generative AI. I think
also add an extra pair of eyes to some things. So you read it first, and then ChatGPT reads it, or Gemini or Claude, just to be agnostic on the models that we're talking about.
Yeah. So then we'll be really afraid that we will both overlook at both the AI technology and the lawyer.
And then you read it again a third time.
And then we read it again, or we put another AI model to read it. I have a question for you, Peter, actually. I was thinking about, we both know what a distribution agreement would typically look like, but we also know what it won't say. And maybe you could kind of think about AI as something that could actually make the contracts better than they are today. Now it will not be a catastrophe to have say 200 pages long contract if it's relevant for the business.
Yeah.
And now we can actually have a system that can easily overcome 200 pages of drafting better than a human being actually. So I think there are also opportunities to like reinvent the legal discipline. How do you see in your field of work? How do you see that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think you touch on something where I mean, again, we can consume information much faster. And you're right, a 200-page distribution agreement or some other type of contract, I mean, with a language model can help you review that much faster, improve on the language much faster than you were able to as a human being, which means that you can then have a higher output of, you can produce more stuff, or you can focus on more relevant advice as let's take my personally as an in-house lawyer. I can focus more on what is going on in the business side, tailoring that advice coming from my chat assistant, helping me to provide the basic work, and then engage with the business on a more strategic level, because that frees up some more mental capacity for me, that I don't have to do all of the sort of more tedious around the middle.
Also because people don't necessarily need longer contracts, right? They need operationalizing of the contracts they already have, right?
That's sort of the next step where we would move into how soon can we start adding AI into the contracts themselves, so they become truly living instruments. I think we are a little bit ways away from that, but of course with the speed of technology, then you would see AIs interfacing with other AIs, handling minor disputes, for instance, things like that, which would again free more work. But then again, would that in turn generate more uncertainty and confusion, and as you say, more lawyers to review what the AI lawyers are doing? So it could be one of those.
There's this tendency, right, that I've spoken about, and some other people on the podcast also called their only constant, is that every time we make something easier to do, we increase the complexity.
Yeah.
And that's, it sounds a little bit like we're inventing that here as well, right? So now we can make any little thing a 200-page contract, right? Was that what you're saying, Niels-Peter?
Yes and no, because today when I see a dispute, I've been in litigation for earlier in my career, and every dispute is mostly reflected by the things that are not written in the contract. So I'm actually trying to improve something here. If it's 1 page or 200 pages, it doesn't matter for me. But it's just the fact that the things you don't write in the contract, that's what the dispute will be about later on. And there's a huge difference on the American and UK system and European law in this sense. But it's just become a lot easier with AI to work with that, so to speak, tension in the drafting and in the interpretation of the contract.
Yeah, so it is getting more precise, but it's also at the same time increasing the complexity of what you have to read. It will be in the end, because there'll be more to read.
Well, you also touched upon the fact that many contracts, they have a life after they are agreed on. They have to get into operations. And that is, in my field now, I'm working with legal consulting. I'm more on the operational side. And I see that as a major challenge. We can help the business units enter agreements, different complexity, all sorts of cooperation agreements, IT contracts, and so on. But then when you have to implement it into your business, then it's a whole other task. So you could actually use the technology to have a better interconnection between the drafting and the legal work and the operations. So for me, it's never about getting it more complex than it is already. It's actually to avoid it being as complex as it is today.
This also means, we're moving maybe people into a room of, advisory or different meeting rooms instead of sitting down writing and reviewing contracts. So it's something I've discussed a lot also on developers. Developers also getting killed. I'm starting to say that we'll all just be middle managers in the future. That's the point. We'll all be sitting in those meetings, being middle managers. You'll be operationalizing the contracts, and you'll be managing someone reviewing the contracts, and did we do it right? And all of that is maybe that's a terrible, nightmarish future dream. But
what you're saying, basically, we have to rely on our own winning personalities to succeed in the future. That might be a challenge for.
No, you just have to win over all the AI agents, and they'll love you anyway, right? They're sycophant by heart. But my core question here, actually, that I've sort of been circling around a little bit, is a lawyer even measured on productivity, guys? Or is it something else? Why do I go to a lawyer? Do I go to a lawyer because I can't read the contract myself?
For me, it's about mitigating risk for you. So you go to me to leave some of the responsibility for the risks with me.
So those are some of the assurances and guarantees and.
Yeah, well, you can never be certain of anything, and even lawyers can't. So it's more about implying a method that we are able to handle risks with. So. So
for instance, how do I put that that into code? Is my next question, right?
Yeah, that might actually be one of the problems, right? Because typically a lot of people have probably experienced when you go to a lawyer for advice, then it depends. And you said in this bit, it's not a certain. Law is not a certain field. It's not. You can say some fields of study are more based on certainty, like math or physics. At least sort of the conventional view of that. Then if you go into quantum physics, then it becomes a slightly more. But let's focus saying whereas, as you said, discussed laws based on language, and a lot of what we do as lawyers is interpretation of language in one shape or form. And then you said your question is, do I go to a lawyer because I need help to read a contract? I would argue yes, because writing and drafting contracts and negotiating them, same as litigation, as you talked about, is a skill, is something you learn, you build over, and it's on experience and trial and error. We've all been in the situation where we drafted something in a contract, and then it comes back to haunt us a couple of years later and said, what the hell was I thinking when I wrote this? Maybe it was late in the evening. It wasn't up to snuff. Then you learn from that experience. So I think, yes, you go to a lawyer for specialist advice, like you go to a doctor to consult on medical issues. You go to other consultants and an accountant to help with your account. So there are certain fields of specialization that that requires a certain degree of specialized skill sets to work with. But then how do you measure a lawyer's productivity or outcome? I think Niels-Peter's point was on risk mitigation is usually what we say. Well, often we say when we try to assess an issue or look into a new service or contract, we look at risks. And we tend to look about what could go wrong and how do we prevent that. And that's the basic fundamentals of what we do as lawyers. Then sometimes we need to come in and help resolve the conflict. That's where you get the litigators.
But my point is, Peter, would it be the same for me if I in the future in 2 years say, okay, I've my boss say, is this contract ready for signing? Yes, for my signature. I would say, yes, it is. I had ChatGPT review it. Would that be the same as saying, no, yes, I had some law firm review it? If it reads it the same way.
I think again, coming back to Niels-Peter's point, well, as part of what you also buy from a law firm is either the sort of the assurance or the insurance in a sense if something goes wrong, but also saying it's the institutional knowledge you get from a law firm or from a consultancy firm that help you with this. So it's that sort of understanding and knowledge that is built into these organizations. But then you can say, well, what if ChatGPT or Gemini or a GPT large language model reviews the contract based on the same knowledge? I think right now we can say that the technology is not clear, and that's where you say, is it precise enough? not necessarily at this stage. It might be in 2 years, where you could say now you've actually managed to clone a lawyer, and you could clone all types of lawyers in all jurisdictions. Then that might be the point. Again, we might have reached that stage of technology where you could say you can get the same quality of service from an AI compared to a human lawyer. But then the human lawyer would be able to engage with you in a different way, putting things into context, explaining it to you, and
but is this then exactly? And
Yeah.
Peter, you work also with you're in-house lawyer, Peter, and Peter, you help in-house lawyers, right? So you're both on the operationalizing side of law to some extent. So is this? So maybe this is maybe too easy to ask you, but is this what we need to do in the future to actually adopt AI as in law to step into a more strategic discussion and more operationalizing discussion with our clients? Would you a core law firm, should they do that? Do you get my point here? Is that actually what we need to do? Look at what will be the task for us in the future?
Well, if we do that, then we will be looking at something that we would believe was more effective than we are today. I think that's only part of the opportunity with the technology. I think we should also look at what are we not doing today. I work a lot with compliance, so there's a lot of just saying as it is, boring work connected to compliance. It's repetitive. It's you need to be very disciplined, and you are typically not that popular when you go around the business units. So having a machine doing it.
I work with Niels-Peter. He's very fun usually, but he is Prince Boring. That's
Thanks, Lasse. Partner for templates. That's what you tend to call me, right?
Yes.
No, but it's to have it. We have lots of other so to say dirty work we put on machines, and it's much easier to you can be provoked by a machine, but it doesn't matter that you argue with it. It's just going to do what it does, and so I think there are a lot of opportunities besides being more effective as we work today. We also have opportunities to do things completely different. As Peter told, we'll clone a lawyer, maybe have like a dispute resolution which is AI based, something like that. But it's a difficult question, Lasse. I think I don't see any boundaries for the technology going further and further.
No, but just this thing that we move up the chain all the time when we automate something, right? So what is the next? How do lawyers even move up the chain? Aren't you already on top of everything, right?
I think we could definitely spend more time engaging with our stakeholders externally and internally. As you said, I'm an in-house lawyer. Could I free up more time to sit down and spend time with my business stakeholders? I think that would help. That would free up. Well, that will help a lot in tailoring the way I advise them on their risks. I would understand their business better. And frankly, we can see now. We don't necessarily always have the time to do that. So adopting this technology could free up some of that time to make our work more precise and more usable to our business stakeholders. So I think that's where we can see the value right now, and that will increase. But you also raise a more philosophical question in a sense. Can anything be automated? We still have that idea of the one-person unicorn company. Is that a feasible thing? Because you could also say, well, can an AI run a business? Well, arguably, it might be able to be as good a business leader as the business leaders we have today, because it's largely built on information. It's read on the internet, and then it has trained itself on business, the collective business wisdom available on the internet. So I think there's also a question of where do we need the human? Where do we still need human beings? At least in the foreseeable future. And I think one of the things is that AI may not be able to do now is reasoning in a sense that we can as human beings. I think that's where you also have the fundamental difference in human intelligence and artificial intelligence. We can usually as human beings infer from a small data set. We can infer and deduct and conclude based on small data sets, whereas AI at this stage still needs large data sets to conclude on anything.
We also quicker currently change our minds where pre-training means pre-training. So there's some kind of there's something you keep bashing out with what you already know, right? but also motivation. I think motivation means that we can understand, what are the goals we're trying to achieve, right? We have a motivation in ourselves. This is not even me. It's not something Carl Friston said in the last episode. But having this is something that clearly defines us as something different from a machine. That we have inherent motivations, and that's also why I tend to think that we need to get into this advisory. What do you want to achieve? I can understand what you want to achieve, and I can help you obtain that goal, right? As a lawyer. And it is for some lawyers that's a completely different thing, right? Some of the worst experience I've had with lawyers were like, I cannot at all help you describe your services. I'm like, but just I don't know how to write this law language. Yes, I can write including but not limited to, but I can't just write that over and over, right? But I can this kind of helping me service, getting into what I want to do, understanding my motivation and my aspirations. That's what I missed in some of the lawyers I've worked with.
Yeah, definitely, and maybe that's also a question of, again, coming back to the point where was there that alignment between the expectations that you had coming in, and was the lawyer frankly good enough at exploring what are your needs? And I think that's where.
Or was he just a law language machine, right?
Yeah,
basically.
And that's where you probably could have just as well asked a chat model and saying, well, help me draft this, because it's not really a human-to-human experience you need to have had there, right? So, and I think that's where you come back to sort of the point, the term intuition. I don't always like that, because you also see sometimes business or decisions are made based on intuition, and that's usually just an excuse for not actually sitting down and thinking things through. and so I this is my intuition, and then I go left where you should have gone right. But I think there's something about human beings do have there is something called intuition, where we make decisions based on feelings and sort of all the input we have, and coming back to my point saying, well, we don't necessarily need to have all the information, whereas that's probably where the machines at this stage, we can outperform the machines, and we can, there's some processing going on in the human brain that doesn't exist yet in an artificial intelligence. But whether or not that will happen down the road, I don't know. That's where things change fundamentally.
Yeah,
I'm very much looking forward to some of the narrow models that will actually take information we can decide on what will it look at, and then implement that on certain scenarios and see how it goes. Because right now, one of my concerns is that we have like a global model, so to speak, but we have local jurisdiction, we have local customs, we have culture. All those I would say concerns that they are different to qualify, but they live within
also,
us.
As you said, we lawyers think you learn how to. Your language is something you get grades for in the university, right? Yeah. So because you learn to think this way only, but this language model can, do you even know what if you just wrote in a little haiku here and there, because it's also trained on that, right? It's like I get your point. Specialized smaller models, right? I
think more haiku in contracts would be a good thing.
Much even higher energy level language.
Let's do that. That's an interesting idea. But I think the narrower models or the more specialized models is something. Yeah, I totally agree, because that's also the concern. We can see, well, it can come up with really good legal language in Danish, but it doesn't have the corpus of information available that we were trained on in law school in Niels-Peter, right? It's something where we say it's not entirely accurate, because it might sort of add a more Americanized, because that's where most of the information is US English. So it'd be an American legal tradition, which is different. So we need these more specialized models where we can, to a high degree of certainty, say this has been trained on the corpus of legal knowledge we have in Denmark, for instance. I talked to a judge, and he said, well, he would love a language model he could unleash on all the criminal case law they have in the Danish court systems, because usually they go in and say, if you had this infraction or you smuggled that amount of drugs into the country, that gives you this prison sentence. But and it's a very mathematical approach, because they usually want to have a consistency in the case law. But now they have to go and review all the case, or have a student review all that case law and come up with it. And an AI could do that much more fast. But that also requires it to be trained on that available knowledge.
But then you also get into, the sort of like an everlasting loop, never-ending loop of how narrow should it go, right? Because you can go more and more. Oh, but I should have one only trained on this specific law, and then suddenly you don't have enough data to make it good quality, and then you go back. I think maybe this sometimes also, to me, speaks about that maybe we'll get an assistant, right? For the next many years, we'll have a good legal assistant, not necessarily a good lawyer, or you have a sales assistant, not necessarily a sales agent, right?
And then you're back to, the point of the AI making mistakes. Well, humans make mistakes as well, right?
But you can blame a human.
You can blame it. There's a high point. There's a degree of responsibility. I think we would solve that probably on the short term, saying, well, it's the responsibility of the human deploying the AI that it's correct. That seems to also probably where we would gravitate. And the cases we've had sort of so far seem to be whoever introduces an AI in the process or the service is also liable for the activities of the AI. But my point was also more saying, well, do we tolerate a certain degree of mistakes coming from the AI? We probably need to do that, because if we expect it to be completely flawless, then it's a long way.
The thing is, it's maybe even impossible, right? Because the world fluctuates and changes all the time, and that's also why we are adaptable creatures, right? Even though, Niels-Peter, you said that law is not supposed to at all be adaptable, right? It's just supposed to be templates that stay forever, right?
It's good as it is.
But
that's why we still use Roman law as the outset, right?
But Niels-Peter, you also said if you just give it this data, and then it will be better if it has this specific knowledge about this specific area, right? So let's move into data. So AI is coming to almost all business applications. How do we maintain control of our data in this way, right? If all of the small apps everyone has suddenly is sending data to some large language model, you both work with GDPR and data protection, guys. Peter, what do you think?
That is a fundamental issue we are tackling with right now, because if let's say personal data is fed into some of these large language models, it's going to be there and it's going to stay there, as it seems now. There is ongoing litigation or emerging litigation. Our good old friend Max Schrems has now sort of focused on chat GPT. Just as an example. So we see that, and fundamentally there's a problem when we get personal data mixed in or other types of data. There's some legal issues that we need to tackle. Some of the ways of tackling it is, for instance, making sure that it doesn't train on input data. That would bring you a long way. Then you wind up with the issue, what about the output data? So if you use it for something relating to personal data, let's take an HR context, for instance, you use it to review applications. Is it correct? Is the review correct? Is the output correct? It doesn't train on the input data, but it gives you a wrong output. It analyzes the resume in a wrong way, or someone has added information that's not supposed to be, things like that. So it will be based, and does it introduce biases and hiring recommendations that are then wrong, or at least not aligned with what you want to achieve as a company? That's an issue. Then there's sort of the more ethical factor of, is it something that people are okay with, that an AI is helping an HR consultant in a hiring process? Is that something, again, coming back to the point, I think you said it good, Lasse, that we can always blame a human. It's easier to blame a human being for making a decision or a mistake, but it's harder to blame an AI.
But it's also easier at the same time to hide a bias in a human choice. So, no, I chose not to hire you because you were Indian. I don't have to tell anyone.
Exactly.
But if I put it into my AI system, I have to tell the AI system, don't hire Indians. And then it becomes a problem because it's in writing, right?
It's in writing, or it's embedded in the system. Like coming back to the case with Amazon, where it was a bias that was introduced sort of by mistake, in a sense, because it was trained on a set of resumes from engineers that had a clear cultural and demographic background. So it was hard for it to unlearn the so-called masculine language in the applications from the engineers and get more female hires, right? So that's where that's the whole point of our biases that will become more clear when it's a machine, because it's more binary.
But also just, this clear issue, right, Niels-Peter, I know we've talked about this in the corridors also, just every company needs to update their data protection agreements with all of the software vendors right now, and how can we control this now?
Well, you can.
Was it already easy before?
I don't think. Well, first of all, the technology we see right now, it wasn't developed without going through the boundaries of the legal options today. So we just have to live with that. And then secondly, will that mean that we should accept it for the future? I think we see a battle of trying to explore the technology, but at the same time applying the principles that we know about confidentiality and protection of personal rights. And for me, we can have guarantees from any third party developing AI, any service provider using the AI technology and providing a service to us. We can have guarantees, just like any other legal agreement. We can ask them, are you doing this correctly? And they can say yes, okay. Then we regulate it in the contract, and that's it. But the problem here is that we all know at this point that the technology is built in a certain way that is not conform with how we used to. So it's not transparent. I think transparency is for me more important to talk about than bias.
But this also means that you don't know if OpenAI actually stole all your personal data and they told you not to do it. But you can know because it's just mixed into their training data. You can't really prove that they have it, can you?
Exactly.
So what does this actually imply? What do you need to do then?
I think well, to take it up a notch, I would say that we see like a battle between the US and EU and perhaps also China. We see some world-leading tech giants. They are deploying all the systems right now, and they have all the data available, and they've had that for many years. They collected it wisely for many years, and we try to regulate them, but it has been very difficult. And now they have the technology, so we should actually spread out the technology, if you ask me. That would be better for it, because or for us as users, if there are more players being active.
Then you're also spreading out your data. So your answer to that is to spread out your data.
Well, it's already spread out all over the world, and many others than the tech giants have collected data in different ways. It's not a single problem for those companies. So for me, it's about having the technology available, having competition on the on what you say on the field of deploying the technology, and then we need to adapt to the kind of technology that will gain your collect your data and use it, and you can't really.
Okay, but now I'm going to say it because I thought about saying it, but I decided not, I didn't know if I wanted. But some of the things that. And you said they took data they were not supposed to take to train the models, and so is this not also about not just getting the DPA, the data protection agreement with a vendor, but also about, do you in general trust this vendor that they are ethical in the way they handle all types of data?
That's a very very interesting question, Lasse, because I think you're right. I mean, underneath all of this is an issue, and it's probably an ethical issue, right? Because data was collected on information largely available on the internet, publicly available on the internet. Then you can argue from a personal data protection point of view, what about personal data coming in and being fed into these models? That's this discussion Max Schrems now has, because when you look him up on ChatGPT, it generates wrong information. Then the argument is he wants that remedied and rectified. Can you get your own information deleted from ChatGPT or one of the other large language models, because it may have taken information you put on your Facebook profile 10 years ago, and maybe you wrote something you shouldn't have written there, and then Facebook has that information, all that stuff. Then you have the whole copyright issue, where it's trained also on vast amounts of copyrightable information. And you're right. I mean, there is a legal uncertainty whether or not these models on a fundamental level are legal. And then you have the conundrum or sort of the dilemma saying, well, us who has a possibility to use the technology, should we not use it, or should we use it due to these ethical considerations? Is it ethical to use this technology at all? Frankly, I don't know what the answer is to that, because there's also the added point.
No, but Peter, you also have to you have to sign also a DPA with the OpenAI, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, so you're going to these gangsters who stole all the data from 15 years, and you're like, fine, I trust your agreement. You'll probably not use my data for anything. That is putting it on. But there is this whole. I trust companies that sell me software. I don't trust companies that sell me things for free, because then I'm probably the product. And I keep on having that. And when I say this to people are like, I actually, that resonates with me, right?
I think that's a very good sort of rule to live by. If nothing is free in life, and you're probably the product. If it's something related to data, or at least your data is in that sense is the product. So I think you can say, well, do I enter into a commercial agreement with one of these vendors, and then we come back to the fundamentals of trusting contract law,
trusting entities as well, right? Trusting what they say.
But you trust an entity sort of on a more nebulous level, but then you have a contract that binds them to do certain things or refrain from certain things. But you could say, well, if they were willing to do something that is questionable, but my point is actually, but you don't actually know if the practices on scraping the information was or is not illegal. We still have the courts to decide on that. But you could argue, is it ethical? Is it a nice thing to do? I don't know, actually. I think we are at the point where now it's happened and the technology is here, so we need to deal with it. I think your point, Niels-Peter, saying, well, can we then start building something that may have been sourced on a more ethically sourced, in a sense, saying, well, the data sets are something where it's anonymized data, so we remove the personal data part. We don't train on copyrightable information. That might be the way to go. So we may need to change some of these models, but I think future litigation will give us a sense of where we are heading.
But you saw what I just did, right? Yeah. We just talked about you need to get more into the business discussions and all that. And then I immediately took you there, guys, and said, can you even handle that question about who are you dealing with when you're when you're buying from OpenAI, right? What do you think, Niels-Peter?
Well, yeah, I think it's a major issue when you look at the use case you're providing me with here. But from a general perspective, I just think we need to adapt to the new situation. We already did that with cloud technology. So that was also major problems with the personal data protection in the cloud technology because of the way the technology was constructed. So I mean, having a global net of servers is actually the great thing about clouds. And it doesn't really fit well with the regulation. And so we found out how to regulate it differently. And I think we need to do the same with the AI technology. And it's correct that there are proprietary data and personal data, and we can't cope with all that as individuals. And the rules are saying that it should be transparent, but then we need to explain every little part of every data processing element, and that's impossible. So I think the rules as they are now gives me a lot of considerations and concerns when I advise companies going into an DPA, for instance. But I think in the future we need to adapt to the new situation, and we need to, as I said before, the power concentration on the technology is a major issue for me. That's what gives me reason not to trust the new technology, because one of the scariest cases I've seen is actually Cambridge Analytica. I always explain that when people ask me, but what is actually the problem? Because I have difficulty sometimes telling what the problem is. It's business. It's good for business, this opportunity. Can you say what the problem is? I say no, but I don't really trust that we lose control. And then they say, what's the problem? What can go wrong? What's the worst case scenario? We provide guarantees in a contract, so on and so forth. But really, the scary part here is that we will only know 10 years later or 5 years later what was the problem actually. And I think that Cambridge Analytica is a great example. It's the case where a lot of data was collected and it was used to influence elections.
And manipulate voters, right?
Yeah. And that's, now we are looking at a case where we have like a expectation on how society will work. We have an election; it should be fair and objective. And then suddenly we find out it wasn't. because of this. So for me, we need to adapt to the new situation. It's not just a matter of looking at the DPA in question. We need to look at the technology, and then we need to get assurance that we can trust the parties providing the technology. We need to make sure that we have a little less power concentration on the deployment of the systems.
I think we are moving into a very sort of existential question in a sense. I mean, and we can see now. I mean, Trump is being inaugurated today as we record this.
20th of January.
Yeah,
yes.
record this podcast episode. And that's a really interesting thing that has happened in the US, right? Where we can see a president who, how should we put this, has a very alternative view on reality and facts in a sense, right? Is moving into the White House, largely based on use of social media technology to promote his political agenda. He is closely aligned now with one of the Elon Musk, who runs,
without even having an opinion about Trump, right? There's the whole Silicon Valley moving into the White House.
Exactly.
And you're talking about more checks and balances on big tech. Peter, it looks different today.
We are moving in that sense in more checks and balances, probably in something that seems to be gravitating in the wrong direction of saying, how do we use this technology responsibly? How do we make sure that we are protected from ourselves? Cambridge Analytica is a good example of election manipulation, and you could probably also find more recent examples coming where social media is being used, and then adding AI on top of that, where it becomes even less transparent what is going on. You can. I mean, back in the day, you had the Russian election bots, right, interfering, and it was pretty clear it was a bot on Twitter. That's probably not clear anymore because you can write in perfect local language. You can write in perfect Danish if we want to interfere with local elections here. So we lose that sense of transparency of what is going on in society, and we are being manipulated or there's a potential of manipulation. And I think that's where we see one of the biggest issues, where then, well, put it honestly, forget about DPAs, right? Because it's a more fundamental issue where we, we concentrate power in big tech, be it either US-based or Chinese-based. Then we have the unfortunate situation where we have very little big tech in Europe. But we concentrate a lot of power there that may have influence on democracy and society in ways we cannot really anticipate, and then you add technology moving much faster, perhaps, than it has done in many years. That's the whole technology acceleration issue we face. But with AI, it can interface with us on a daily level where we may not even know what is going on.
Exactly.
I think the DPA, if I should go on to a physical, tangible example, the DPA is like the speed limit. So we know now when I go to the street, it's 50 kilometers per hour in Denmark, in the city. And then now we have a new technology. We have a new car. It's fully safe to drive 80. So we need to develop the rule. So
this analogy brings me to a question I actually wanted to ask you, because so the DPA is often primarily personal data protection we're talking about a lot, actually. So it's like you can only go 50 kilometers an hour in the town, except if you drive another vehicle which is proprietary data, you can just go 200 miles an hour or some other. If it's not personal, go crazy, kill yourself, right? So to some extent, maybe GDPR has become so big that it becomes the only concern, and companies are saying, "Oh, there's no personal data here. Great, let's just throw it all to whoever wants it," right? How do we? Is this also the reason we don't have tech in Europe? Because we have this really big rule set on personal data, and it's skewed because it doesn't really it's not balanced with, companies can have a lot of proprietary data that's not personal, that they still want to keep, IP stuff.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I think you had 2 points there, right? One is, do we need to protect other types of information, not only personal data? Yes, that's a clear resounding yes, right? Because you may have important information about your corporation. The Samsung coding case, where Samsung proprietary software code wind up in ChatGPT, is a prime example of that. And now it's in there. You can't get it out. That's an issue.
But developers are just often sitting. There's no personal data here. Okay, so I can do it.
So you need to have,
not necessarily, right?
You need the guardrails on all types of data that you can see, all types of information that you want to put into these models and use. So that's and again, I mean, you also want to make sure that the input, the code you put in, and the output that comes out when you have it code for you is also correct and doesn't introduce vulnerabilities or mess up your system. So that's the same consideration. And then your question on GDPR, I think we can say, I mean, those of us, we both, Niels-Peter and I, work with GDPR. I think we both have a sort of same sense of ambivalence to the legislation, and has gone too far in a sense. Well, the European Commission, you said cloud is something we found a solution to. I'm not entirely sure that's correct, because the EU Commission has sued its own supervisory authority on the use of Microsoft technology, right? So
they're trying to adapt.
Yeah, they're trying to. So we still haven't solved the cloud issue, and then we have all sorts of other issues. Now you're not allowed to write Mr. or Mrs. on application forms, because that's unnecessary collection of personal information. All that stuff.
My child's class, they can't have this, centipede with the kid's name and birthday on it hanging on the wall. No, because they can't be on the wall because it's personal data.
There are good examples of good examples of bad applications of data protection law, where that's probably not the point. When we envision data protection law, it goes back a while. Whether or not the GDPR is the reason why we don't have tech in Europe, I think it's more of a fundamental issue. We may have relied a little bit too heavily on US-based technology, but also not to mention the Chinese technology that seems to be okay. We seem to be in this weird situation where we are very skeptical towards US-based companies, but what about TikTok, for instance, seems to be still...
We also just saw, Tesla going full self-driving and all that, and then you see Volkswagen being like, no, we don't think it will be ethical to do some small step toward it. Like, but come on, but there's just... Why? I sometimes flabbergasted.
Yeah, but that's because you have some of the fundamental... I mean, you have that sort of the big problem with how do you handle self-driving cars if they're faced with... a traffic accident or things like that. How should they react? So you need to come up with some rules. But you're right. Are we then stuck in the regulation part in the EU?
I think we're often stuck in. And this is my point. Aren't we often stuck? And this, because this was also a question. The US innovates, China replicates, and the EU regulates. Right? This is everywhere. It's like I'm also annoyed at seeing it. But one of the things that really annoys me is that we are so fast at coming up with regulation sometimes, but building standards and implementing digital standards across all of the European countries, like digital identities, digital invoicing, digital mailing, all the things. We have that in Denmark, but they don't have it in the rest of Europe. I talked to a Belgian company where they were like, Belgium Mercedes, they were like, no, we've never had a request for sending digital invoices before, ever. Like, what is going on? It's like, is it even 1,000? It's 500 kilometers away from Denmark. So this regulation, but no standardization. And standards is something you can build enterprises on, right? As well. Yeah. What do you think, Peter? Sorry, I didn't let you answer the other one I asked you.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about the question actually. Can you repeat?
But the proprietary question I asked about before, and now my next question here would be more about: do we need to work more on developing standards instead of necessarily just regulating? Or how can we use? I have multiple thoughts now. That's my problem, maybe. How can we use regulation and compliance as a right to play? What do we need to do?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things when you use new technology is that we need to gain trust. We need to understand how it works, and then we need to trust it, and then we can actually scale it or make it legitimate to make it a license to operate. And right now we are talking about trust issues. So we are talking about when you look at the cyber threat, for instance, that's an agenda that's really important at the moment, and it's separated from the personal data regulation issues, and it's a much bigger driver, if you ask me, for asking the right questions. So the cyber threat means that, for instance, having a huge Russian provider would be off the table. It would be off the table to have some Chinese providers. In Denmark, we had the Huawei 5G technology that was. They came short in China because we were not certain. We couldn't trust that.
Yesterday the US had the TikTok blackout.
same issue. So I think the right answer to your question for me, Lasse, is that we need to think about building trust around the technology rather than looking at specific rules and use cases. And I mean, it just has to develop like any other business idea.
So that's not really necessarily either a legal discussion, right? Trust is, or is it? I don't know. On the Danish law, what's it called? Danish the law building. What do you call that in English? I don't know.
The court.
The court.
Yeah.
The lands court. I don't know.
We have different courts.
Yeah.
The court of the no, but it says that with law you build a land, you build a country with
That's
law.
the
With
city
law
court.
you must build your country, right?
Yes.
But to some extent, with trust you shall build your country. I would say, right?
Yeah.
Because trust is stability. Stability is also trust in law, right? So the trust is fundamental, right? So is something eroding that's like more fundamental than laws here?
But I think maybe that's also why that's also what the EU is trying to accomplish with, let's say, the GDPR or the AI Act, trying to regulate this technology so it enables that trust. You can say, can we implicitly trust human beings? I think that's where we say, well, fairly early on in civilization, you tend to develop some sort of legal system in a sense, because that's also a way of saying, well, the law sets down the expectations to all of us as individuals, and then you have a system that enforces that, be it judges or something like that. So saying there's also a way of a neutral arbiter saying comes in, this is the way things should be handled. So I think we can see most of the advanced civilizations, they fairly early on develop a legal system. And my joke coming back to the Roman law, I mean, we still use some of the fundamental principles coming out of Roman law in the modern legal system. Maybe that's also why we have a tendency to speak in Latin sometimes. I don't know, or just to back to the hyper.
I'm very happy you didn't
language,
do that today.
But my point is saying, what the EU might be trying to accomplish, whether or not we're doing it right, is to build that sort of foundation that allows for trust, especially when trust might erode between individuals, because sometimes individuals are tempted to do something that might be on the wrong side of the law, or sort of what is correct or ethically sound, and then you have the legal system that puts checks and balances in, and that's maybe what we're trying to do. Saying, and we're coming back. I think Cambridge Analytica is a perfect example of where if we didn't have data protection law to stop something like that, then we would wind up in a situation where we might be gravitating towards some of the jurisdictions we then compare to the regions, US or China, where we can see things are maybe not in a way. Would we prefer to live in a country like that, where your personal data could be used for nefarious purposes? I think China is an example of hyper surveillance now being fueled by technology. Where do you really want to live in a society like that? That's a fundamental question, and I think what we're trying to do with this legislation is protect the liberal democracy that we've built and most of us know and love, at least in Europe. Whether or not we're succeeding, I think we should probably sit down and say, have we gone a little bit too far in the regulation side? And I think also we need to be conscious of the fact that, your point, Lasse, US innovates, China replicates. I think on the AI space, it might be the other way around, that it's actually China that innovates. They seem to be leading on most of the AI research. We just don't see that technology yet because it's probably being applied locally.
I think what people always miss is that, and what we've also discussed today, that access to data is super important here.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter if you have it. You can have a self-driving car and you can put the tech in that Tesla has tomorrow. You can probably get it from someone who copied it somewhere. But if you don't have the data Tesla had for 12, 15 years, you can't really make it drive the way you want it to do, right? The technology is not the point. The data is actually the point.
Yeah.
And to a very large degree when you want to build scaled AI models, right?
Yeah.
But it's also a wrong way to put it for me, but it's not like, do we use trust to build GDPR regulation, or do we use GDPR regulation to build trust? I think Niels-Peter and me, we discussed a couple of weeks ago, or I discussed with Niels-Peter. Sometimes I force him into weird thought experiments, but I actually... Right. So, but actually, and he forces me to watch terrible movies 15 years ago. I watched one of them yesterday. Anyway, but was around Dungeons and Dragons. Have you played Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, you have. Great. So you also know this about being, you can be lawful good, you can be chaotic evil. That's the two opposites, right? But the whole thing about you can actually be good without being lawful. Right?
Yeah.
So is this something that is that the problem? Maybe that we're building a lawful system globally, something like that, but it's not necessarily good, or is it the other way around?
I think that the digital infrastructure is stronger than the physical infrastructure right now. So the speed and the possibilities that are within that system is actually magnificent. But it's also why we have issues with trusting everyone within that system. So it's really everything is possible, and then we try to regulate. So we have like digital borders, you might say. If you have to cross a country, then you need to show your passport and stuff like that. And that's, I think that's one of the reasons it's compliance is not very popular at the moment, because we have a lot of rules that are actually trying to support that we should be sure that we can trust everyone in, for instance, a data processor chain. And that's a lot of vendors at the moment. I've seen like 20 vendors, even more in the same processing activity. And then we need to trust them all, and we need to trust all the transportation systems in the digital world alongside it. And it's really difficult to get a hold of that as a company, and even as a lawyer or as a team of lawyers looking at that. So I think for me, yes, we should look at the rules, and we should remember the principles, and we should be curious about the technology, but we can't really, as you said, Peter, we have a liberal system. It's built on trust. Yeah. So we need to continue believing that. And then I think we need to look at the cyber threat agenda. That will be, for me, the most efficient way of getting the right mindset into the protection of data, proprietary data, personal data, even some of the data that we don't know will have value later on.
So you're saying being lawful is not enough to be good?
Not really. I mean, it's just a difficult question. We can't. You can be lawful good yourself, but the system will be lawful neutral, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting application of the alignment chart from Dungeons and Dragons, but I think, can you be good without being lawful? Yeah, I think so. I think one of the issues we tackle with this, and then it becomes philosophical questions: are human beings fundamentally good, or are they self-serving, more gravitating towards evil? I think it's a little bit of both. I think we probably all have. Then some. You could probably say some human beings are what we call evil in the way they act, but I think a lot of us have a self-serving side to us that then is usually through socialization somehow kept in check, and most of us view ourselves as good. But do we need legal boundaries and rules for a society to function? I fundamentally believe so, but that could be because, am I lawful good? I don't know in Dungeons and Dragons terminology, but I think
there's also the lawful evil, right?
Lawful evil, exactly. You can be on the side of law and
you sort of walked around that one. No one here wanted to say that one, but that also exists in the chart, right?
And you use law for your own purposes, but you operate within the legal space, and you do things. You would typically be some sort of despot or tyrant, right? Because you strongly believe in laws that are self-serving. So I think we need a legal system with boundaries, and it's part of our moral compass and socialization we have in at least a liberal democracy. And then it becomes a fundamental question: well, is liberal democracy what we want? Is that the best way of operating a society?
I was just about to say globalization, and somehow that almost sounds like any lawyer looking for the court of arbitration or something in the contract. So what country are we in, right?
Yeah.
So let's globalization is all good, except if the court of arbitration is in Denmark, then it's or in US, then it's no good, right? What is this pillar?
Yeah.
Smiling.
Yeah, because that's one of the main questions we always look at when we get a contract. I'm asked very often to review a contract, and the first thing I look for is where is the jurisdiction, because that's the one thing that will get me out of play. If it's not in my jurisdiction, then I'm reluctant to do the review. There will be someone better than me. Of course, I guess Peter, you would know, working as in-house lawyer, that between many jurisdictions that you get a hang of it at some point, and some things are the same, but theoretically you would keep within your own jurisdiction.
So with law you need to build a country, as it says on the Danish law building, but with law you build a global society as well.
Well, it's difficult to agree on that. We try in the European Union. I mean, we've also tried in a sense on a global scale, right? I mean, you could sometimes ridicule the UN for doing silly stuff, and maybe, but coming out of, well, 2 world wars, right? We had one test run with the League of Nations after the First World War to build a legal order. So we had an order a way of resolving disputes without resolving to war. That didn't really work, but then the second time around after the Second World War, we managed to build the UN that has managed to solve a lot of conflicts. Now you can see is trust again eroding in the UN. Then we're maybe back to the way that we can see a large regional or superpowers working, or major powers working maybe against the UN. And then we're back to the whole point about, I mean, are we regulating something to protect us from ourselves? In a sense, it's also largely tied to the concept of human rights that we could also argue has gone a little bit too on the far side in the way we apply human rights in Europe. But again, I would prefer living in a country where you at least have human rights protection, and there is a sense of the courts and the legal system is there to protect you from yourself sometimes, and again. Data protection law is also largely to protect us from ourselves, saying, well, we recognize that people might share information they didn't want shared when they have a chance to properly think what they were doing, then there's a protection that comes into play. But we need to find a way to strike a balance. And I think to your original question, Lasse, we may be moving in a slightly wrong direction, especially in a very, very competitive international environment. Now where we can say, we can't really necessarily trust the US to be on our side fully anymore. And we can probably say Russia and China are not on our side. Then the EU need to find a way where we hopefully could balance this innovation with regulation.
The EU needs to figure out, are we on our own side? Are we regulating the other countries? Or are we actually regulating something that makes sense for the EU?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the GDPR was directed at countries outside of the GDPR region, right?
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah, but if we had all the technologies available in European Union, it wouldn't be such a hard question. So,
and maybe we are sort of reaping what we've sowed because we haven't really invested in technology. We haven't invested in the military, and now we are a little bit stuck. Or at least we need to find a new way out of that, where we need to rely more on ourselves, and that's probably where the European Union would become a force for really good for us in Europe, because it unifies us, and because we are small countries, some smaller than others, but if we stand together in the EU, that might sort of bring us, and could we lead the way in a good?
Or could we just protect the old, right? You saw this discussion again. Oh, maybe we should just start allowing fossil fuel cars because we have a lot of those companies. So maybe we'll just, now is the moment, right? Guys, for the EU.
But then usually technology is something where we could see is also what would probably have solved a lot of our problems, right? Both on pollution and generally sort of lifting up a society. Technology has usually played a part in that. So I think technology is a sense
it's a lever,
good.
definitely.
It's a lever, for good, but it can also be used for bad. So again,
not a liver, but a lever. Or maybe also a liver. I don't know.
Lever. I think you can pronounce it different ways.
But guys, this has been a splendid talk. And I'm so happy you joined me today for this episode of The Only Constant.
Thank you.
As you both know, I have a final question for each of you. And we're going to do it twice. So we get 2 today. Wow.
Two only constants.
Two only constants, yeah. But Peter's only constant and Niels-Peter's only constant. So, guys, are you ready for this? Yes. I think we'll start with you, Niels-Peter, and then we'll go Peter in the end as the external guest for the episode.
That's good.
So, you ready, Niels-Peter?
I'm ready.
Great. So, Niels-Peter, what is the only constant?
For me, the only constant is safety and security. So safety is the factor where we try to avoid accidents, and security is the factor where we try to avoid threats getting to us. And behind all the compliance rules that I know, and actually many legal rules, there will be a search for more safety or more security. And we have now this new technology, AI. So the reason why we talk so much about it is because we are perhaps a bit afraid what it might do to our jobs, what it might do to our lives, how it will develop over time. And when I try to search myself for why are we looking at this so in such a skeptical way, I know that we started this podcast framing that legal officers are skeptical by nature, but when I visit that side of me, it always comes back to whether or not the technology is safe or secure. So from a work perspective, the security issues is protecting confidential information. It's also not allowing people to look at data that we wouldn't like them to do because they may be a threat to us. They may use it against us in a certain sense. And for safety, we've already seen many dilemmas, and perhaps the reason why we are deploying the AI Act at the moment, that what if 13-year-olds chat with ChatGPT and gets bad advice that they might hurt themselves or do something that is just plain stupid or something like that. It's unsafe. So many of the dilemmas, they tend to work around the part safety and security, and therefore it is the only constant for me.
That's a great only constant, Niels-Peter. And it also relates back to the whole trust thing we just discussed as well, which I like to put as an a priori thing to law, but we shouldn't discuss that further now. And Peter, what is the only constant?
I'm guessing I can't use the Dungeons & Dragons alignment chart, right? That's not. No, I thought about. If you
planned for it, you could actually.
Yeah, exactly. I thought about it a lot, and I think I landed on curiosity. So more on sort of the human mind, how the human mind engages with society. I think it's been something where we constantly explore, and we explore new things. We seek knowledge or a way of understanding the world. So that's something that happens when we are children. Babies, they once they start being able to move around, what they do is they engage with the world. They try and test and see what is going on. And that's a fundamental way of building new knowledge. We always seek the next step. That's why we have science. Without sort of curiosity from our scientists, we wouldn't have the technologies we have today. We wouldn't have AI without someone being curious and following that track as far as it goes, and then you build on the next step. It also is why we have religion. Sense of that's another way of explaining what is going on around us. It's also why we tell stories, why we share adventures, and things like that. But fairy tales, it's a way of explaining the world around us. But I think we also have inherent dangers. Again, coming back to the baby, too much curiosity will kill the baby or kill the cat because you eat something that's poisonous, for instance. I always like to think of all the people have gone before us and tested the food that is poisonous. Why we know today what we can eat. Some brave souls who will pay the ultimate price for curiosity. So again, I think that comes back to the dangers in curiosity and sort of tying what we talked about today. Well, sometimes we need to have boundaries on the technology we develop. Now we've sort of the atomic bomb is probably a technology we may have wished that we could reinvent. AI, comes with a lot of possibilities, but also dangers. And ultimately, we could develop technology that would then wipe out humanity because we will be inconsequential in the AI's mind. So curiosity can lead us into very strange places and very dangerous places. A lot of religion may not have been a force for good in society, but a fundamental curiosity, be it good or bad, is a constant, I think, in human and societal evolution.
That is a very great and thoughtful answer as well. And I actually love the way you also mentioned it, Peter, that curiosity killed the cat. Because that sort of is the central piece between you and Niels-Peter's constants, that curiosity can kill the cat, and it also resonates throughout our conversation today.
They work pretty well together.
Yeah,
actually.
they
really do.
I have a 1.5-year-old, and he's very curious, and I'm all about safety and security.
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess you would be, the partner for templates. But thank you both so much for being here today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Lasse,
Likewise.
for inviting me.
Thank you, Lasse. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Niels-Peter.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.